Hey everyone, welcome back to the Checkered Sky channel, where we dive into true crime stories. Today, we're stepping into a haunting case from the heart of Missouri that shook a small community and left lingering questions about trust and hidden dangers. This is the story of Alissa Shippert, a 22-year-old woman from Platte County whose ordinary day turned into a nightmare. It all started on a warm spring afternoon in late May 2011. Alissa, known to her friends and family as a kind-hearted soul with a love for the outdoors, decided to head out for some solo fishing along the Platte River. That day, she grabbed her gear and drove to the Platte Falls Conservation Area, a peaceful spot with a boat ramp where locals often escaped for quiet time by the water. But as the hours ticked by, she didn't return home. Her family grew worried when calls went unanswered, and by evening, they knew something was off. The next morning, on June 1st, authorities received a call from a man on his lunch break who was walking near the riverbank. What he stumbled upon sent shockwaves through Platte County. Alissa's body, partially submerged downstream from where she'd been fishing, clad only in a bikini top. Her car was still parked at the boat ramp, untouched, with her fishing gear nearby, which raised more questions. When authorities arrived, they immediately understood that this was no accident. The scene suggested a violent confrontation, and from that moment, Platte County law enforcement began what would become one of the most unsettling investigations in the region's recent history. News of Alissa's death spread quickly. For a county where everyone seemed to know each other, it was almost impossible to comprehend. Who would want to harm her? Why here, at a familiar spot by the river? And most of all, who could have done it? Alissa grew up in Platte City, Missouri, a town where neighbors often knew each other by name, and family roots ran deep. After high school, Alissa did not immediately follow the traditional path of college or a corporate career. Instead, she chose hard work and self-sufficiency, taking a job as a cashier at Casey's General Store in Platte City. But Alissa wasn't defined only by her work. Those who knew her well described her as a woman with passions and interests that gave her joy. Fishing, especially along the Platte River, became one of her favorite ways to spend time. That connection to the outdoors reflected her personality, grounded, direct, and unafraid to be herself. Alissa's family later said that she lived her life authentically, without pretending to be someone she wasn't. On the morning of June 1st, 2011, the Platte Falls Conservation Area remained as serene as ever, a stretch of land managed by the Missouri Department of Conservation, encompassing about 2,300 acres along the Platte River. This spot, just east of Platte City, drew locals for its natural beauty, with trails winding through wooded areas, open fields, and access points to the water for activities like fishing and boating. The river itself, meandering through the county, offered calm shallows and deeper channels, bordered by rocky banks and vegetation that provided a sense of seclusion. Around noon that day, a local man named Brian McKinney, who worked nearby, took his lunch break in the conservation area. He often used this time to stretch his legs and enjoy the outdoors, walking along the riverbank paths that offered views of the water. As he strolled downstream from the boat ramp area, where the river curved gently, he noticed something unusual in the shallows. Partially submerged and caught against the bank was what appeared to be a human form, face down in the water. Drawing closer, he realized it was a woman's body, clad only in a bikini top, with visible signs of severe injury. Shocked by the sight, he immediately contacted authorities to report his find. Deputies from the Platte County Sheriff's Office responded promptly, arriving at the scene to confirm the report and begin securing the area. The location was specific, downstream from the Platte Falls boat ramp, a popular entry point for river activities, where the water flowed steadily but not too forcefully that day. The body had drifted a short distance, estimated at about a quarter-mile from where Alissa's car was later found parked, untouched, with her fishing equipment still nearby. Upon arrival, the deputies cordoned off the riverbank, marking a perimeter to preserve any potential evidence. They noted the body's position, partially in the water, with the upper half on the muddy edge, and observed extensive trauma, particularly to the head region. Scattered nearby on the dry bank were small bone fragments and areas of blood staining the ground, indicating the incident had occurred close by before the body entered the river. Medical personnel were summoned to the site, and the county medical examiner's office took charge of the initial examination. The woman was pronounced dead at the scene, with preliminary observations pointing to blunt force trauma as the cause of the injuries. Her identity wasn't immediately clear, as no personal items like identification were found on her, but the deputies began cross-referencing missing persons reports from the area. Alissa's family had already reported her missing the previous evening, when she didn't return home or answer calls, so a connection was made relatively quickly through descriptions and vehicle records. Lab tests, including dental records and other forensic methods, would later confirm it was indeed Alissa Faye Shippert. But at that moment, the focus was on preserving the integrity of the site. As word of the discovery spread through official channels, more resources poured in. The Platte County Sheriff's Office, led by Sheriff Richard Anderson at the time, mobilized a team of detectives and crime scene technicians. They photographed the area extensively, using grids to map out the riverbank and collect physical evidence. Items like the bone fragments were carefully bagged and tagged for analysis, while search teams combed the surrounding woods and water edges for anything that might explain what had transpired. Divers from the Missouri State Highway Patrol were called in later that week to search the riverbed for additional clues, though initial efforts on June 1st centered on the immediate vicinity. The conservation area's trails and parking lots were checked for tire tracks or discarded items, and rangers who patrolled the land were interviewed about any unusual activity reported in recent days. Investigators knew that understanding the timeline was crucial. They estimated the body had been in the water overnight, based on environmental factors like the river's current and temperature, which was mild that spring. The Platte River's flow, influenced by recent rains but not flooding, could have carried the body from an upstream point near the boat ramp. Authorities held a press briefing to share limited details, emphasizing that the investigation was active and urging the public to come forward with tips. A hotline was set up through the Greater Kansas City Crime Stoppers, offering anonymity and a potential reward for information leading to answers. Detectives followed up on early leads, such as reports of vehicles seen near the boat ramp the previous day, but many proved unrelated. The medical examiner transported the body to the morgue for a full autopsy, which would take place in the coming days to determine the official cause and manner of death. Preliminary reports confirmed the head injuries were extensive, consistent with forceful impacts, but details like time of death were refined through toxicology and other tests. As the initial evidence from the riverbank underwent lab analysis, detectives from the Platte County Sheriff's Office pressed on with a thorough canvass of Alissa's world, determined to trace any thread that might explain her tragic end. Forensic teams scrutinized the bone fragments and blood samples collected near the water's edge, but the river's current had washed away much of the potential DNA, leaving limited traces to work with. This setback meant relying heavily on human accounts, so investigators expanded their interviews beyond the immediate scene, reaching out to those who knew her best in hopes of uncovering a motive or overlooked detail. They started with her family, delving into her home life and relationships. Her father, Alissa Shippert, described her as a wonderful daughter who had recently cut her long hair to donate to cancer patients and was eager to assist with tornado relief efforts in Joplin. Her sister, Pam Clark, portrayed Alissa as a free spirit with a beautiful personality, someone who cherished the outdoors and maintained strong bonds without any apparent conflicts. No family tensions emerged, and relatives confirmed she had no known disputes or enemies that could point to foul play. Shifting to her social circle, police spoke with friends who echoed similar sentiments. Alissa was easygoing, involved in her church community, and kept a low-key routine that rarely strayed from work and family time. They asked about her romantic life, probing whether she had been seeing anyone or if recent interactions stood out, but nothing unusual surfaced. At her workplace, the convenience store in Platte City, where she'd been employed for years, co-workers provided insights into her daily interactions. They described her as friendly with customers and staff alike, often acting as a mentor to newer employees. Investigators asked about any odd customer behavior or workplace dynamics, including if she'd mentioned plans to go fishing that day. Several colleagues confirmed she'd shared her excitement for the outing, but no one recalled tensions or threats. As weeks stretched into months, the case began to cool. Summer brought no breakthroughs, despite repeated reviews of phone records showing Alissa's last calls were mundane, checking in with family before heading out. Detectives revisited the autopsy findings, which detailed extensive blunt force trauma consistent with a heavy object, but without a weapon recovered, progress stalled. Then, in late December 2011, a chilling call came in around 4 a.m. on the 26th. Deputies rushed to an apartment in Farrellview, about 10 miles from Platte City, where they found a 21-year-old woman gravely injured from a razor attack that had left her abdomen slashed open. She was unconscious, but alive, rushed to the hospital where she fought for her life. Her boyfriend, who had spoken with her earlier that night around 1:30 a.m., reported she'd mentioned a male acquaintance visiting her home. When she regained consciousness on December 30th, she provided a crucial statement, identifying the man as someone she knew casually. This unexpected lead prompted detectives to bring him in for voluntary questioning on January 6th. But what truly stunned investigators was the name the survivor provided: Quentin Odell. The revelation hit like a bolt. Odell wasn't a stranger. He had been a colleague of Alissa's at the convenience store. Quentin Odell grew up in the same small-town environment as Alissa, attending local schools where he crossed paths with her sister. He held a job at the Platte City convenience store alongside Alissa for a period, giving him familiarity with her routine and social circle. Described by those who knew him as someone who blended into the community without drawing much attention, Odell lived a relatively unremarkable life prior to these events. No prior criminal record surfaced in public reports, which made his involvement all the more surprising to those around him. His connections extended to Alissa's family. He'd been inside their home and interacted with her father on occasion, underscoring how intertwined lives could be in a place like Platte County. During the interrogation sessions on January 5th and 6th, Odell provided a detailed account that pieced together his actions. He explained that he had gone to the river that May afternoon and encountered Alissa while she fished. According to his statement, he swam in the water, leading her to believe he had drowned. When he resurfaced, a confrontation ensued. Odell described how both reached for the hatchet on his belt, and he struck her in the back of the head with it. She then collapsed to the ground, crying. Odell said he got down on his knees and repeatedly struck her in the face with the hatchet until she was no longer crying or breathing. He then pulled her body into the river before floating back to Platte City, where he showered and went to bed as if nothing had happened. In a separate telling to investigators, he noted that Alissa had done something to anger him during the encounter, prompting the fatal response with the hatchet. The motive, as outlined in Odell's own words, centered on that sudden escalation at the riverbank, a mix of perceived threat during the struggle and immediate anger from whatever transpired in those moments. Prosecutors highlighted the premeditated nature through the use of the hatchet, which he carried with him, but Odell framed it as a reactive clash rather than planned. In that late December incident at the Farrellview apartment, Odell described heading over to visit the 21-year-old woman on the 26th. During his first talk with investigators, he claimed he'd left while she was still alive and unharmed. But in a follow-up interview, he shared more details about what unfolded inside. He said he'd overheard her on the phone, getting into a heated argument with a recent boyfriend. That conversation set him off, leading him to grab a razor blade from the kitchen table. He then simply walked out, headed home, and only noticed the dried blood on his hands and shirt the next morning. In his account, he disposed of the shirt right away. But that was only part of the truth. Following the confession that linked Quinton Odell to both incidents, authorities moved swiftly to formalize his custody. On January 7, 2012, deputies officially charged the 22-year-old with first-degree murder and armed criminal action in connection to Alissa's case, along with similar counts for the December assault on the other woman. Additional charges were later added in June 2012 for the second victim, a 21-year-old woman from Farrellview, including forcible sodomy stemming from deviant sexual intercourse during the razor attack that left her gravely injured. This was corroborated by her hospital statements and forensic evidence from the scene. Bond was set at $2 million, reflecting the severity of the allegations, and Odell remained detained as the process unfolded. In Alissa's case, no sexual violence charges were filed, as the autopsy revealed her cause of death as multiple blunt force injuries to the head with no indications of such assault, and Odell's confession described only a confrontation escalating to strikes with a hatchet before dragging her body into the river, without any reference to a sexual motive. Her body was found partially nude, clad only in a bikini top, which aligned with the warm spring day when she went fishing. She likely wore swimwear for comfort by the water, and the lower clothing may have been lost during the struggle or due to the river's current, though sources don't specify beyond that. Platte County prosecutor Eric Zand pushed for capital punishment, emphasizing the calculated nature of the acts and their impact on the community, arguing that Odell's use of weapons and the severity of the injuries warranted the harshest response under Missouri law. The state portrayed him as someone who had exploited trust, given his prior acquaintance with Alissa through work, and highlighted how his actions in both cases demonstrated a pattern of deliberate harm. On the defense side, Odell's attorneys worked to mitigate the outcome, contending that while the events were tragic, factors like his lack of prior record and the reactive elements in his account, such as the described struggle at the river, should spare him from execution. They advocated for a plea deal, underscoring the risks of a jury trial where emotional testimony could sway toward the death sentence. This strategy paid off when, on January 24, 2013, Odell appeared in Platte County Circuit Court and entered guilty pleas to 1 count of first-degree murder, 2 counts of armed criminal action, and 1 count each of first-degree assault and forcible sodomy related to the 2 incidents. In exchange, prosecutors dropped the pursuit of the death penalty, opting instead for a life sentence without parole on the murder charge, plus consecutive terms totaling 100 years for the other offenses. During his sentencing, Odell apologized to his victims and the victims' families. Judge Abe Schaefer accepted the plea and imposed the sentence immediately, ensuring Odell would spend the rest of his days behind bars at a Missouri state prison.